Hello, and welcome once again to The Old Man Speaks. I'm Joshua. I come to you 3 times a week and talk to you for 5 minutes. Today I have a story. It's the story of the old man and the young man. The young man was called David Canterbury. He lived with his 2 younger sisters and his parents at 23 Elm Street. The old man lived next door at 21 Elm Street, and his name was Jackson Albert Farmer. His wife was June, and they were very elderly. David Canterbury was an angry young man. Like a lot of kids that age, his parents just didn't understand him. His father very authoritative, and his mother always trying to be just the perfect mother. David, David, his mother would say, would you like the first thing or the second thing? And David might say, oh, the first thing is fine. She would say, how about the third thing? Are you sure you don't want the third thing? Are you really thinking that the first thing is good enough? How about a fourth thing? And she would drive him crazy. His father would just be like, do what I tell you to do, and don't ask questions. He was very fed up with this type of thing, and school was so stressful to him that when he came home, he would just go upstairs, go to the computer, and bury himself in movies and games and whatever he could find. He was not relating well to people. He was not doing well in school. Mr. Farmer next door was very elderly. Spent most of the year outside in the garden, and when he could not garden because of the weather, you'd see him by his art table. You'd see him through the back window, there'd be a light on, and he'd be drawing or writing. No one knew what he was drawing and writing, but he'd be there hard at work. One day David came home, and they said Mr. Farmer had passed away. He had got some fluid in the lungs, went to the hospital, and died very quickly. He was very elderly. David never thought much about the old man. He was like from a different planet. He had always been there. But he did not quite know how to feel about this. The parents went to the funeral, which was that Friday, but David and his sisters were expected to go to school. They couldn't miss school. So they really didn't find out too much about Mr. Farmer's life and what he did. But something strange happened 3 days later. June, the widow, came over to the house with a large book, and she said that Mr. Farmer asked that we give this to David. David looked. He said, what? He opened the book, and there were like very specific instructions about what to do every month of the year in the garden. This work was massive. It had little drawings. It even had links to YouTube videos. David didn't even know he knew how to use a computer. David found this all so strange, such a large book. He sat down and read a little bit of it. Mix the lime in with the compost under the tomato patch. Very specific instructions. He saw what time of the year he was in, and he read that, shook his head, and went to sleep. When he got up, he had to read it some more before school. When he got home from school, he had to go next door just to see where these things that were in the book, if they were actually there. And Mrs. June, she said, you can go in any time. The keys are under the shed, just like it said in the book. So little by little, he started trying to do some things. He wasn't real experienced. He was just preparing the soil at that time in October. But through the winter, he was watching all sorts of YouTube and reading books and looking at the garden and seeing where everything was. And by the spring, he was out there a lot. David really wished that Mr. Farmer were still around so he could look at what David was doing and see if he was doing it right. But it just so happened there was this girl named Becky in his class, and both of her parents were master gardeners. So she used to help them all the time, and she knew a lot about gardening, and she came over and watched what David was doing and helped him. And the two of them would spend 8, 10, 12 hours out in the garden that summer. At the end of the summer, they had enough produce for Mrs. June, for the entire Canterbury family and for all of Becky's family. They had a lot of produce. It was a lovely thing. And in David's senior year, he did really well in school. He started learning to work around his parents and accept them as they are. And he sat out in the garden one day and he thought, gee, the most important person in my life would have been the person who I never even paid much attention to. Until next time, have a good week.